Dr. Wilson here, and today we need to talk about why your gout keeps returning even when you've done everything you were told to do. You cut the red meat, you gave up the shellfish, you stopped touching organ meats, you dropped your purine intake as low as you possibly could, and still, out of nowhere, that same burning, throbbing pain shows up again in your big toe or your knee. If that sounds familiar, you're not imagining it, and you're not failing at the diet. There's a piece of this puzzle that almost nobody explains properly, and once you understand it, the whole picture changes. Let's start with the truth about purines, because it isn't wrong, it's just incomplete. Purines do convert into uric acid in the body, and for a slice of the population, trimming purine-rich foods really does bring their gout under control. But for a much larger group of people, that approach barely moves the needle, and they're left wondering what they're doing wrong. Here's what years of clinical observation and research have pointed to. The biggest driver of gout isn't how many purines you're eating. It's how resistant your body has become to insulin. That single shift in understanding rewrites the entire story of this condition, and it's the piece I want to walk you through today, along with exactly what you can do about it. Think of uric acid as having two exit doors out of the body. One door is your kidneys. The other is your gut. Under normal circumstances, your kidneys handle the majority of uric acid clearance, filtering it out and sending it on its way. But when insulin resistance sets in and insulin levels climb too high, that kidney door starts to swing shut. Uric acid that should be leaving your body instead gets held back, circulating and building up. This is precisely why people living with type 2 diabetes, a condition rooted in insulin resistance, so frequently develop gout alongside it. The two conditions travel together far more often than most people realize. And that backed-up uric acid doesn't just sit quietly. It settles into joints, most famously the big toe, but also knees, ankles, and fingers, triggering the kind of pain that makes people describe gout as one of the most excruciating conditions a joint can experience. It can also crystallize in the kidneys themselves, forming uric acid kidney stones, and it can accumulate in other joints over time, contributing to a form of arthritis separate from the acute gout attack itself. Now let's talk about fructose, because this is where things get genuinely surprising. High fructose corn syrup is a massive contributor to uric acid production, but fructose in general, regardless of its source, behaves very differently from other sugars once it enters your body. Fructose shows up in table sugar, in agave syrup, in whole fruit, and heavily in fruit juice. But here's the catch. Your liver is essentially the only organ equipped to metabolize it. Almost none of your other cells can process fructose directly, so the burden falls entirely on your liver, and that creates problems on multiple fronts. Unlike glucose, fructose doesn't trigger the hormonal signals that tell your brain you're full. There's no natural braking system, so you can keep consuming it without your appetite ever registering satisfaction. On top of that, fructose converts very efficiently into fat inside the liver, which is a major reason fatty liver disease has become so widespread. But the piece that matters most for our conversation today is this. Metabolizing fructose generates a substantial amount of uric acid as a byproduct. So even if you've never touched a shellfish platter or an organ meat dish in your life, if you're drinking fruit juice regularly, thinking you're making a healthy choice, you could be quietly fueling your own gout. This is exactly what trips so many people up. Fruit juice carries a health halo. It sounds wholesome, but juice strips away the fiber that would normally slow sugar absorption and blunt the fructose load, and the pasteurization process strips out much of the beneficial plant compound content as well. What you're left with is concentrated fructose without the buffering system nature built into whole fruit. It's a very different substance than biting into an actual piece of fruit, and the body responds to it very differently. Here's an interesting wrinkle, though. Fructose doesn't spike insulin nearly as much as glucose does. So you might assume that means it's somehow safer for uric acid control. It isn't. It simply reaches uric acid through a separate pathway, hitting the liver directly rather than working through the insulin-kidney mechanism. Two different roads, same destination, elevated uric acid. Which brings us to the other major and often invisible contributor, refined starches. Bread, pasta, cereal, crackers, biscuits, All of these break down rapidly into glucose, and that glucose surge triggers a corresponding insulin surge. Remember that kidney door we talked about? High insulin is exactly what slams it shut. So even someone who has never eaten a piece of candy in their life, but who eats bread and pasta at nearly every meal, can be driving chronically elevated insulin, and with it, chronically impaired uric acid clearance. That uric acid then has nowhere to go but back into the joints. So now we've covered two major mechanisms: insulin resistance closing the kidney's exit route, and fructose overwhelming the liver. But there's a third piece that deserves just as much attention, and that's your gut. Certain populations of gut microbes are specifically responsible for helping excrete uric acid on a daily basis. When your gut microbiome is healthy and diverse, these microbes quietly do their job, day in and day out. But when there's an imbalance in that microbial population, something increasingly common thanks to processed diets, chronic stress, and frequent antibiotic use, that excretion pathway weakens considerably. And because a diet loaded with refined sugar and fructose also damages the gut microbiome over time, you end up with several of these mechanisms reinforcing one another simultaneously. Alcohol deserves a mention here too, because it may raise uric acid levels more aggressively than almost anything else on this list. Between the metabolic burden alcohol places on the liver and its direct effects on uric acid production, regular drinking can undo a lot of otherwise careful dietary work. I like to think of the body as an aquarium. If the water itself becomes toxic, it doesn't matter how much you feed the fish or how many individual symptoms you try to treat, the fish stays sick. Your internal environment works the same way. There are perhaps 10 or so major regulatory signals running your physiology at any given moment: insulin, cortisol, systemic inflammation, sleep quality, gut function, and more, and every one of them shapes how you feel day to day. Usually, one of these signals is more disrupted than the rest, and until that particular one gets addressed, the others tend to stay stuck no matter what else you try. Given everything we've just covered, it's honestly a little surprising more people don't develop gout, considering how common insulin resistance has become, how much fructose sneaks into the average diet through juice and processed snacks, and how disrupted so many people's gut microbiomes are after years of antibiotics and processed food. All three risk factors are converging on huge segments of the population simultaneously. There's one more nuance worth understanding, especially for anyone considering or already following a ketogenic or very low-carbohydrate approach. During the initial transition period, when your body is shifting away from burning glucose and toward burning fat for fuel, producing ketones in the process, uric acid levels can temporarily rise for roughly the first 1 to 2 weeks. This happens because ketones use some of the same transport channels in the kidneys that uric acid relies on to exit the body. So early on, ketones can briefly compete for that same exit door. This is a temporary phase. Once your body adapts, typically within that first week or two, uric acid levels drop back down, often ending up lower than where they started, because you're simultaneously correcting the underlying insulin resistance that was driving the problem in the first place. So what can you actually do about all of this? A few supportive measures can help in the short term. Increasing your fluid intake helps your kidneys flush uric acid more effectively. Celery has traditionally been used as a mild supportive food for uric acid balance as well. But these are supporting actors, not the main solution. The real, lasting fix comes down to addressing the three root mechanisms we've walked through. First, reduce your fructose intake meaningfully. That means moving away from sugary foods, cutting out fruit juice entirely, avoiding anything sweetened with high fructose corn syrup, and being more mindful of how much whole fruit you're consuming, particularly if gout has been a recurring issue for you. Second, work on lowering your baseline insulin levels. This means addressing not just added sugar, but also the hidden glucose load coming from refined starches like bread and pasta. One of the most effective tools for bringing insulin down is intermittent fasting, simply narrowing your eating window and having 2 solid meals instead of 3 meals plus snacks throughout the day. Giving your body extended breaks between meals allows insulin to settle back down to healthier baseline levels. Third, focus on rebuilding a healthy, diverse gut microbiome. This one takes patience, since gut healing tends to happen gradually rather than overnight. Fermented foods are your best allies here. Things like sauerkraut, kefir, and plain yogurt, all of which introduce beneficial microbial diversity back into your gut. The richer and more varied your gut flora becomes, the more effectively those uric acid-clearing microbes can do their job. When you put these three pieces together, addressing fructose, correcting insulin resistance, and restoring gut microbial balance, you're targeting the actual root causes of recurring gout, rather than simply avoiding a list of foods that only tells part of the story. For most people, this combined approach succeeds where purine restriction alone falls short because it finally addresses why the uric acid was building up in the first place, not just where it was theoretically coming from.